Testing. All right, so we're going to go over flooring. A lot of people are intimidated by flooring, and I understand because you're looking usually at a lot more square footage than you are with somebody. Will you run and help her really quick get in the door, Dom? Sorry, you're too late. Sorry. There was a struggle going on. All right, so a lot of people are understandably concerned when you're doing flooring because it's a lot of square footage, so you're out a lot more product if you mess something up. You're not messing up a $200 mix. You could be messing up a $7,000 floor or something like that it would cost for you to redo it. With that being said, it's usually a lot less likely that you mess up a floor. A lot of your factors like edging and things like that are not a factor when you're doing flooring. A lot of the most challenging things with epoxy are usually how you deal with a sink, how you deal with an edge profile, how you deal with a cut-off edge up to a stove or a fridge or something like that. So a lot of those factors are just gone when it goes to a floor. The other things about epoxy, though, the fact that if you have a porous substrate, that it'll release air and oxygen will come up and leave bubbles and things like that, that is still something you want to concern yourself with. So don't think that when you learn about flooring epoxy, you're learning about a whole other product, because you're not. The flooring epoxy is a 2-to-1 mix, different mix ratio, different resin, different hardener, and it is a totally different product, but you still need to use a lot of the same exact things you already learned with the countertops. It's just easier. So you got to be thoughtful. How you spread it's easier, a lot of that. But every time you learn, like a wall epoxy, different viscosity, different hardener, different resin, but it's still epoxy. It still gets hot in the container. You still have a mix ratio. It's still 100% solid. So let's say that you have some resin that doesn't have any hardener mixed in with it. It's never going to harden. That's the same with the wall, same with the floor, same with the countertop. Doesn't really matter. So you just realize you have different viscosity products, different mix ratios, different times. Some you want to let it get hot, some you don't. So you just kind of, I'm trying to give you guys as much knowledge and tools for you guys to utilize, and you might be on a set of stairs, say. I was in Singapore, we had to pour a really big staircase, and so I just used countertop epoxy because I wanted it to have, it was more likelihood because of the viscosity that would actually bond to the stair face, whereas flooring has a really low viscosity. It's going to flow. It would have flowed all to the bottom. I couldn't have got the actual veins and whatnot because I poured kind of a dirty pour down the stairs. I got it to really bond to the step face all the way down. But because of my knowledge of countertop versus the flooring, I chose to use that product on a floor. So even though we call it flooring and countertop and wall, it doesn't. We do a lot of bar tops. The bar where you just ate, that was wall epoxy with true metal on top. So, and I did it because I knew the viscosity of product I wanted, the time frame. So just really think about the resins as just individual tools and different things for different situations. Same with flooring. Does everybody know what OSB is? Anybody not know what OSB is? So it's oriented strand board. It's large particle board. You'll see it has the large flakes. It's what most subfloor, like if you're building a subfloor on top of a crawl space, on top of a stem wall, it's usually the top layer is OSB. It's really cheap. It's cheaper than plywood and whatnot. It's actually pretty impervious to moisture. It's a pretty durable sheet. It does tend to, like, has anyone ever seen them not dry a house in on time? It rains in there. The OSB swells up. You've probably seen it before, right? So there are some thoughts to that. When moisture gets on OSB, it tends to swell. Well, one form of moisture is epoxy. Just because it's not water doesn't mean it's not moist and going to make it swell. So does everybody remember the product? What do we mix with our epoxy to make a slurry to fill in voids? Gypsum. And that's just 20-minute, 5-minute, 45-minute. It's totally inert. It doesn't matter which one you use. You're just using it to create a paste that you can trowel into your joints. You can trowel it into tile grout lines. You can trowel it into a big major fracture, crack, spalled concrete. You can also, the joints between OSB. Now, this is probably a little more accented than what it needs to be. Sorry about this, guys. I'm going to try to, I'm not super tall, but I'm going to actually try to make this a tiny bit taller. So, you're not going to have a major gap in between your sheets of OSB, but it's definitely a transition where you're going to have a lot of movement. It's usually sitting on top of a floor joist like that. You're gonna have nails shooting into both sides. You're usually gonna have nails running down the center floor joist as well. You're gonna fill all your nail holes and all your joints between the OSB with that gypsum mix. You've got to also be kind of thoughtful. I don't think I can draw on this. Yeah, I can. Okay, awesome. Except I switched to the next slide. Your floor joists, if you're looking at the top down, are running like this, right? And then you have this sheet of OSB setting here. Does that make sense? And you have another sheet that you throw on here, right? So you not only have gaps between your two sheets, does that make sense? You also have gaps here where they're butted up, but you don't have a floor joist. It's not like they have a floor joist running across here. So your seams aren't always backed with something to hold something up. So you want to be thoughtful when you're mixing this paste to trowel in for the joints on OSB. You want to be kind of thoughtful that it's thick enough consistency that it's not going to drop right through the floor joists right here, if that makes sense. It's pretty easy. 1-to-1 mixture ratio with the flooring or countertop work really well for me. I also fill all my nail holes, and I like to also do this the very first thing I'll do in the house. I'll sand and get any little high spots dealt with off, pull any nails. You don't want to have, if you have a nail in the middle of your floor that's sticking up here or some debris, and then you're trying to skim coat over this, you have to skim coat high enough to completely cover this high spot. If you just pulled this stupid nail out, you could have actually used a window squeegee and pulled your product extremely thin. I generally deal with all my gaps, joints, anything like that, nail holes, and then I'm going to take even a smaller sander. You don't need to use a big walk-behind sander. You can take a nice DA, dual action randable orbital sander or something like that, and you can sand all your joints just like that. A tool I use a ton, Flex makes a good sanding machine. Has anyone ever used Flex tools? Any granite guys in here? Is that what you use? A lot of Flex. They also make a really good dry sanding tool. It's more like a grinder body essentially, but the head still is a dual action. So it rotates and it oscillates at the same time, and it'll outlast 10 regular DA sanders. They do cost a little more, so you might spend 180 bucks on a good one. It's really useful. If you want to bump up and spend a little more money and get what I would recommend that I wish I'd had when I did construction, and I did not. I was too cheap to buy a bunch of Festool stuff because I thought my guys were probably going to sell them for weed or crack or whatever. Festool will save you a ton of money. There's two things. For starters, Festool is a really high-end tool, and I do not represent Festool. They're a bunch of Nazi motherfuckers if you actually try to represent them. I tried to get them all at cost so I could sell them all at cost, and they found that out. Now I can't even buy Festool from the local guy because he's so afraid I'm going to do some kind of fucking scam with Festool. So I thought it would be cool if I could buy them all at cost, and if they give you a 50% discount or whatever, then I could offer tools at cost to all my dealers. The grinder and vac systems that we do in a lot of our advanced classes, I sell everything like that, all at cost. If I get a discount because I buy 10 of them or 30 grand worth or whatever, I sell them all at cost to you guys because I just hope we all use the best tools. So you don't need a big major tool. A Festool is awesome because it also cleans all the dust, so you're not dusting your customer's home. The other thing that a really good vac sander does is it usually cleans your sanding disc well enough, if it's working correctly, to where it'll actually not gum up and dirty up. Has anyone ever gummed up a sanding disc from sanding something where you get clumps underneath it? A lot of times that's just because the dust, the powder that you're sanding off the object isn't getting pulled out quick enough from your sanding pad. It keeps getting pushed around on the surface. It generates heat, resolidifies whatever that product is, and turns into this like bubblegum chunk stuck to the bottom of your sanding disc. You end up blowing through sanding discs like crazy. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you're probably not going to be doing anything that we're talking about. So, yes, ma'am.
But on dust, will it screw up your project or float into it, or will it stay sunk down if you don't get it all vacuum kind of thing?
I mean, you could pour over some dust if it's on a floor. I'm just I believe in being more careful. A lot of it's customer perception as well. I think it's much easier for us to use a vacuum sander and sand and clean as we go than dust the shit out of the customer's home and then go back and try to clean the customer's home, and they have the perception that I fucked up their house in between. So I'd just rather not do it in the first place. So the first thing I would do is mix my slurry, fill in all my nail holes, fill in all my joints between the OSB, if that makes sense. Then I can wait overnight. I've already cleaned up, pulled all the nails, anything like that before I do that. You want to pull anything, any debris. Say you're pulling vinyl or something off of one of the rooms and it's going over the OSB. Pull that the day before, because you never know how much of that OSB that the glue is going to get into. So when you're pulling vinyl or something like that off, you might be shredding some of that OSB where you'd wished you could have sanded it and then put some slurry in there. But remember that what you're doing is not sealing your actual floor up. So this OSB in between the joints is still very porous. A lot of air will come out of it. So that's when you're going to come back the next day and sand all this. Now you should have a pretty nicely profiled floor. And you're going to come back and you're going to mix just your diamond gloss epoxy, which is our standard flooring epoxy. It's the most commonly used. It's very forgiving. Has a lot of air release in it. It's not super clear. So if you are running a clear, you need to run that clear at about 70, 80, 90 square feet per gallon. If you're running, like the top of this floor is a clear, but we ran it pretty thin because it's opaque if you run it too thick. The cool thing about that is you can run it with a window squeegee and seal up all this OSB, and that's, no, just a window squeegee. I don't clean my windows with a notch squeegee. So, that's a good question. And a lot of flooring guys will use notch squeegees, and we will use them. We just won't use them in a situation like this because we're trying to seal the wood up, and you don't want to leave any excess.
One more dumb question. Should we just skim coat the whole thing with the gypsum powder, or just?
No, you're not skim coating the whole thing with gypsum. You'd be using a whole bunch of product. You don't want a big bunch of shit piled on your floor over here. You want your floor as clean and flat as possible. You're just putting the gypsum in the low spots, nail holes, joints between the OSB, so you have a smooth floor to work with. Then you're mixing your diamond gloss the next day, and I usually run a window squeegee, and I'll seal up my whole entire subfloor, run the whole entire floor. And remember, you're trying to get as much of it to soak in as possible. So just because you took a squeegee and you ran product from here across the floor doesn't mean it absorbed as much as possible. So take your time. If you mix 3 gallons for a room, cross squeegee it in too, kind of work it back and forth. And then usually what I do, once I already have pulled it pretty tight with a squeegee, don't have a lot of excess in that floor, on that floor or in that room, is I'll take a heavy nap roller, like a 5/8 nap roller or something like that, and I'll just cross roll everything. Even though the floor should be really dry, you've all probably tried to pull epoxy or any kind of product with a squeegee, and you're trying to clean it, and every time you chop with that squeegee and pull, it leaves a bunch of product right there, and then you go chop 2 inches back and 2 inches back trying to get rid of that line, and it just keeps prolonging that line. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Or when you pull the squeegee and little beads roll off each end of the squeegee, don't worry about it. You don't have to be overly careful with it, because you can actually just take some alcohol, spray your floor down really quick, and then cross roll it with that roller. Now on floors, for safety reasons, never use a torch. You don't even need a torch on the job site. You're going to be having so much alcohol on that floor, unless you want to die like a martyr back in the day, you probably should not have a torch on your job site. So there's no reason for one. Yes, sir.
Another thing, I heard you mention the linoleum and stuff, so should we pull all that off?
I'll go over that. We'll go over that. Right now, yes, sir.
Substrate pertaining to your dialogue, would self-leveling be another alternative?
Ooh, I'll also go over that. That's a very good question. So right now I'm just covering OSB. This is how I would go over OSB. This is if I had an OSB subfloor. If I had a wood subfloor, like say 3/4 inch oak or something like that. We just had a dealer, God rest your soul, can't remember your name or I'd call you out, but he fucked up a floor pretty bad. He didn't seal it up. So what happens between all these little planks when you put 3/4 inch oak together, right? And then my guess is he drill mixed a bunch of countertop product or floor casting and then poured it across the top because he thought it'd be really sweet. Well, all these air bubbles come out between all these planks, right? You want it to be decorative. You probably don't want to put gypsum in there, correct? You know what I would probably do? I would either use a very small mix of wall epoxy and fill in any really major cracks and joints, because if it's really small, you can keep it pretty opaque. You could also maybe color tint it with any of the liquid primes or anything to try to match your wood floor color, sand all the excess off. Or what I might do is probably my first attempt would be to pull countertop, and I'd probably just squeegee countertop into this as thin as I possibly could, and I'd probably come back the next day and squeegee it again and see if I could stop up most of my joints just using countertop product. But you wouldn't want any excess, because what happens when you have air that can go through, and whether it's concrete, wood, doesn't matter what it is. If air can come through something and then you have a thick enough layer there that when air comes out, it traps a little air bubble and then creates a bubble in the top of your surface. If there's enough epoxy for an air bubble to get trapped in, you'll have a fucking air bubble every time. This seems like rocket science to some people, and they'll tell you, no, I put lots of epoxy down because I had a lot of air coming out of the slab. That's the wrong thing. If you have a lot of air coming out, you do not want a lot of epoxy. You want it to be so thin that when the air comes up out of this wood and tries to trap an air bubble here, there isn't enough epoxy on there for an air bubble to be created in the first place. Does that make sense? And that's two benefits. Not having an air bubble and then being a whole lot cheaper. So there's no reason for me to tell you to use less product unless I'm trying to save you money and a big pain in the ass. So I would squeegee coat this slab. I would fill in my joints first with my mix. I would squeegee coat it once. A lot of that OSB, the oriented strand board, is gonna swell up. You're gonna see little flakes that seemed like they were really stuck down the day before. They're gonna kind of swell up and be lifted a little bit. The cool thing about this is your floor is gonna be freaking rock hard. It's ridiculous how durable it is once that whole sheet's been saturated with epoxy. You have a floor that you walk through and everything's bouncing and spongy. You walk through the next day, it feels like you have a concrete floor almost. It's amazing. That's when I would take a walk behind sander and really quickly sand all my OSB, because that's when you're getting a really flat profiled slab. Now, instead of going back and fixing any little patch areas, you'll always, especially when you're learning, you'll always miss a few little spots that once you're just sanding your floor because you sealed it up, you're like, oh shit, I should have put slurry there. Don't mix something that's gonna take a 24-hour cure before you can sand it. Go get Bondo body filler. You know what body filler is, everybody? You can buy it at Lowe's, Home Depot, and automotive supply shop, just about anywhere. Get Bondo because you can force your cure time. Mix a little bit, and when you're Bondoing something, you don't want to Bondo a big blob. Has anyone ever done that and tried to sand Bondo? You basically don't sand Bondo very easily. So you're trying to fill in the void. It'd be better to fill it in really low, sand all the excess off, and fill it in again and sand it. You can get it to cure in 5 minutes where it's sandable. So I would use Bondo to fill any little spots the next day. And remember, your floor is probably gonna look really hideous just to the eye, but you're looking for a nice smooth floor that you can run your hand across that's really smooth. So usually I'm gonna sand and seal twice on this and fill this in with gypsum first and Bondo any little cracks or joints I missed. Yes, ma'am? No, but you're not looking, this is prep. We're not doing a decorative floor yet. So all of our prep, you're looking for the same end result. You're looking for a sealed, non-porous, smooth surface. Does that make sense? So we'll go over the decorative later. Prep, this is how you prep OSB. Concrete, there's 4 major different things that happen with concrete. You have a regular fracture, but there's no vertical movement, meaning this piece isn't higher than this piece. That right there would be considered a fracture with vertical movement. What are some causes of an actual fracture in a slab? Settling. What'd you say? What'd you say? Somebody else said something? What's the most common cause of a fracture in concrete? Temperature. Temperature. Or if you're in Grand Junction, concrete guys suck and you're cheap as fuck. So, and you put no gravel, no mesh, no rebar. You don't tie into the slab next to you. Yeah. Sorry, Grand Junction suck. If you want to put a bunch of people out of business, I'll help you if you come to this town. So, yeah, concrete. Concrete, one of the biggest impacts to it is temperature extremes. It's called thermoshock. So if you want to damage a slab, you could hit it with a sledgehammer forever, or you could pour it at 55 degrees, warm it up to 130 during the cure, cool it back off to 55, you're going to have a big crack, right? Expansion. A slab, say if you have a 100-foot wall, you're pouring a big long stem wall. If you're to pour that when it's, say, 75 degrees out, you come back when it's 20 degrees out, that whole foundation wall is going to be about 1.5 inches shorter. Does that make sense? It's because it actually shrunk. So you have to think of expansion and contraction. As it shrinks, it usually leaves one piece of the slab stationary there, another piece stationary there, and you have a fracture in the middle. What's the distance between expansion joints that you should have in most of North America? Yeah, you said it. 8 feet, yeah. I've been down to the equator quite a few times, and you can actually see slabs sometimes that are done very correctly, where good concrete guys did it. Down in Brazil, I worked there for a really good concrete company, and I saw whole entire floors with hardly any fractures in the whole place, and they had no saw cuts. But the coldest it ever probably got was 70 degrees, and the hottest it ever got was probably 85, 90 degrees. So you have almost no thermoshock. A lot of people also live in areas like this, Grand Junction. Who would consider Grand Junction an extreme temperature place? And a lot of you wouldn't, because you'd be like, well, it doesn't really ever get over 110 degrees, right? And it's not Alaska, so it's not 65 below. But what we do have is it gets 20 below sometimes, a really cold night. And it doesn't have to be 20 below very often. It has to be 20 below once every 7, 8 years. That's enough. It happened. You're going to have a fracture in that slab. Now, what does it do? 110 degrees? So what is that? You're looking at almost 140 degree temperature variance. Whereas even Alaska with a negative 65, but a high of 60, you might not have as bad of a temperature variance. Does that make sense? Really hot, but not ever as cold. Also, you don't have that temperature variance. And you're looking at the temperature extreme from the coldest to the hottest. What is that? That's going to create the most fractures. So you get a lot of that around here. Now, if they did everything correctly and they just didn't cut a joint in the correct place, you're going to have a lot of fractures like this. What we see here a lot of times is a run-in saw cuts, which I love saw cut joints because they're easy to pour epoxy over. They're not troweled in where it disrupted the concrete. What I notice is you'll have a lot of slabs where it just worked out better for the saw guy to cut them every 12 feet. So in every 12-foot cut, you'll have a little fracture because it wasn't enough expansion and contraction. You're not allowing enough movement in that slab. What happens when you trowel a joint or saw cut a joint? It's still fracturing. It's just controlling it and making it happen on that spot. That's why they call it a control joint. So the other kind of fractures you see a lot around here, if you say maybe you don't put any gravel down or road base or whatever, you don't build up under your pour correctly. Maybe you have a big heavy truck tire here parked every night and you're watering the grass. This turns all to mud. Pretty soon your little crack that you had a little tiny fracture, water got in it, rusts through your mesh, rebar. Maybe you don't have any mesh or rebar in your actual slab, and you end up finally breaks and you start getting vertical separation. That's one of the most difficult things to deal with. This right here, you fill this up with the slurry. It's real easy. The slurry we talked about with gypsum and epoxy, you fill this, grind it back off flat, you have a really nice slab again. Your epoxy with the slurry on an interior setting, not exterior, that's a different case. Interior, it's gonna move enough to where you're not gonna refracture right here. Does that make sense? So you're not gonna re-break this joint. This right here, you have to be a little bit more thoughtful. It's kind of a pain in the ass when you're dealing with this because you're not gonna probably be able to float enough material across this to be flat, right? You could, but it'd be significant. So usually what I do, half grinding, half pouring. I'm gonna usually try to grind the side of that slab off and then fill in whatever and float it across as much as possible. Now I've dealt with some really extreme situations where you have, say, 1.5 inches, 2 inches of movement on one side and none on the other. You do use a lot of product, but anybody in the industry, all your competitors would have used a ton of product too. So it's not like you're really more expensive or more of a pain in the ass than somebody else. Now, why would you not want to use, can anyone think of a situation and why you would not want to use self-leveling concrete? Bond strength's a huge part of it. What's another major factor when you're going to be putting epoxy over the top? Yeah, just because something hardens doesn't mean the moisture is out of it. Has anyone ever ran 5-minute mud on a wall? Was it dry in 5 minutes? It was not dry in 5 minutes. It was hard in 5 minutes. It wasn't usable. In 3 minutes, it became non-usable. In 5 minutes, it's hard as shit. You can sand it. It is not dry. There's still a ton of moisture in it. A lot of your self-leveling concretes have a ton of dry polymers in them. Now, dry polymers are awesome. It adds strength and flexibility to concrete, right? It also helps with bond strength, but what it does is it traps a ton of moisture in there. So you'll have a slab now that you poured a self-leveling floor patch across here. You could have a ton of moisture in that slab for a long time. You might actually get pushed off this job for 2 weeks to let it actually dry once you put floor patch down. If that's something that times doesn't matter at all, use it all day. If time matters at all to you, that's why I would go with epoxy and aggregate, because as it hardens, it's not hardening, it's not drying, it's curing. So you're actually curing with no moisture. So you could come back the next day as soon as it's cured, sand any high spots, coat it again without bubbling and all the issues that happen because of that. Now the other thing that happens, bond strength. You'll never find a polymer with even 10% of the bond strength of a good epoxy. Epoxy should saturate the slab, especially a good product like what we sell, 100% solid. It's soaking in, bonding down into the slab, and then hardening. It's not like a polymer coating. a lot of water-based products, solvent-based products. Who's used a solvent-based epoxy? Yeah, I have. They don't really have a great bond strength, especially they're not really shock resistant to like impact and whatnot, because as the actual epoxy soaks in and lays it on the surface, as it soaks into the slab, what happens to the slab? The slab draws all the moisture out of it. The slab might be in the form of, or the moisture might be in the form of xylene or acetone or some kind of ketone, something like that that's helping the product move. As it pours into the slab will suck all the moisture or the accelerant, the solvent out of the actual epoxy, but it still leaves the epoxy on the surface. So you end up getting a really thin linear bond to the top surface. And then most epoxies are not very shock resistant when they're cured by allowing an evaporation of a solvent-based substance, if that makes sense. So usually 100% solids chemical cure leaves a much more durable, flexible end result of the coating. So I'm pretty careful with any water-based patches, same thing. When you put a polymer down, the slab a lot of times soaks all the water out of the polymer-based modified floor levelers, but it's not pulling the floor leveler into the slab, it's just pulling the water out of it, making it dry. So you end up with two pieces that you warm them up and cool them off, and you can pop them right apart. So vertical patches, you're cutting off what you can, filling the rest of it back in, get the best you can. You might think about patterns and stuff like that, and selling the customer something you feel like you can do. Yes, sir?
Any prep, do we need to expose the aggregate or no?
I'm trying to get loose debris off, make sure it's porous enough to, and a lot of times really smooth troweled concrete's not as smooth as people think, so I'd run a floor grinder over it real quick if it was a big job. Mechanical bond, yeah, and usually that's only if I thought they'd tried a bad sealer on it before, but you can usually, if they haven't sealed up the slab and you're squeegee coating like our diamond gloss, you're gonna see that concrete gets that really nice dark look to it, you're getting penetration, it's gonna bond. What I do a lot of times, because I'm not gonna test it, I've had guys dump water on a slab, oh, let me see if it actually gets a dark spot so I can see if it's gonna penetrate. Now you have moisture there now. Spray some alcohol on it. So, and we'll go over more about alcohol in here in a second. Saw cuts are awesome because you can just fill straight across it. We also have a, if you're doing a regular house, just mix a slurry, it's much cheaper. If you're running a huge slab, if you're doing a 40,000 square foot lobby or something, which I've done before, you're gonna wanna use our dual cartridge system, and all you're gonna do is you're gonna slightly overfill this joint, right? You're gonna slightly overfill the joint. That's a saw cut joint. Then you can take a sharp razor scraper, run it back down that joint, and it just cuts it perfectly flat to the top of the joint. Does that make sense? Trowel joints. Everybody thinks that they're troweling. Every concrete guy, and I'm sorry if you're a concrete guy, every concrete guy thinks they're fucking better than they are. Concrete guys all think they're amazing because their coating is not glossy. If you all of a sudden made all the slabs in America all perfectly glossy where you saw a reflection, you'd see some really wonky, uneven shit. You don't see it when it's gray, and the tile guy might be able to hide it. But the problem is, you put epoxy over the top of it, you're gonna see a lot of unevenness. I notice a lot of raised when they trowel, that's a tool joint. They trowel, there's three main sizes that they actually tool joints with. The larger the joint you're troweling, the more likely that they're displacing a lot of product out of the joint and pushing it up onto the sides. It's not real evident when you look at it, but when you're putting a perfectly flat coating down across it, especially at your intersections where joints come together, you start seeing that there's a significant buildup around the joints. So usually I'm gonna run a floor grinder over this before I do any of my patch. I had a class with me. We did not have our floor grinder delivered on time, so I ended up putting patch in all these joints, and I felt that they were high. I knew they were. Well, guess what? Have you ever tried to diamond grind something that's not fully cured? It's like gummy as hell. It's a mess. It's a pain in your ass. You shouldn't even waste your time trying to do it. So I filled all these joints right up to the surface. Then I tried to grind them back down, right? Well, you're grinding through tons of product, so not only did I waste product, but I wasted a shit ton of time because it was so hard for me to cut the edges of those tool joints off. Does that make sense to everybody? Are you getting sleepy? Nope. Sorry. I was trying to embarrass you.
What's the temperature range you have on this concrete for like what you can do? Because you have a basement,
I would never pour on something if it was under 50 degrees for any reason. Slab temp. I would still make sure my ambient temperature, if it was 50, I'd make sure I was 90 degrees in there. I control my job sites. You have to control your job sites. If I could warm up that slab, I would. Sometimes, say it's wintertime, it's in a basement. It is warm outside, but that basement's had a lot of moisture underneath it and whatnot. You may never be able to get that slab above, say, 55, 60 degrees. In that case, make sure your ambient temperature is nice and warm. Control the product temperature. A lot of people's problems is they'll say, well, I couldn't get the slab warm. Well, that's not the excuse for mixing cold epoxy. Cold epoxy, the chemical components do not properly mix, and you're not getting the proper cross-link to actually harden your epoxy. So on this, cut it off, then fill it. Then go on and do your seal coat. Now, just like the OSB, you're going to want to seal this whole thing up. Does that make sense? So, because if you pour a flood coat on this concrete, even though it's perfectly smooth, it's ground flat, you filled your joints, you're still going to get a lot of bubbles happening, and the bubbles are because air is coming out of concrete, because that's what concrete has in it, is air.
So always give it that thin layer first.
Yes. So, and at least one. I seal coat a second time a lot of jobs just because it's less chance of any failure. If, say, your second skim coat, there is times when you have a lot of hydrostatic pressure, or sometimes hydrostatic vapor away from the slab can force air movement under the slab. I've seen that a lot of times where there's not actual moisture in your slab, but because there is water movement or some other factor outside of your slab, it's pushing air through underneath the slab. We also have mill tailings here in Colorado, and I think it's a fucking joke that a bunch of loser-ass Democrats, and I'm not very political, I think they made a bunch of money off of taking more taxpayer money. They took your taxpayer money to build a bunch of shit, then they fuck you again and try to make you pay to undo the mill tailings. That happened around here a ton. Now, I don't believe you're getting radiated any worse from mill tailings in your slab than a damn microwave in your house or a TV. But what does happen is air pressure. So some of the vapor under slabs that does come from that, you get a lot of airflow. So you can end up with holes that even though you've skim coated a slab twice, you may have to actually caulk in some of those joints, and not with silicone, with a DAP caulking. And if I see a little divot and I've seal coated that slab twice, I'm gonna caulk that little hole right there to actually keep it completely sealed up. No excess at all. You're just blocking the air movement, wiping all the excess off, and you're good. So, and if you're a Democrat, I'm okay with you. Just don't tell me what you think. Yes, sir. I don't like Republicans either very well.
If that's an application on SOG slab on grade, what about site floor where compliance calls for waterproof? Would the epoxy be an alternative to waterproof?
We'll just keep going over this, and if you have questions at the end, if you still have questions, that's fine. So next, a situation that I've seen a lot around here, and we see a lot like California, you have a lot of walkout basements. California, you have a lot more water flow than here. Here, you don't have water flow as often, but it can be intermittent, but it can be really serious. So a lot of times what happens here, how many days of rainfall do we have a year? Like 3, fucking 1.5, 1.11 or something. Yeah, it's ridiculous there. We have no rainfall, but when we do have it, a lot of times we don't have proper drainage. We have a lot of problems because of it. So I'll kind of show, this is my attempt at a walkout basement right here, but you have a retaining wall here holding a lot of dirt. One situation in particular, I had a customer who had a really nice walkout basement. She wanted us to pour a few thousand square feet of epoxy in it. Really nice job. What I noticed is there was a lot of moisture in here. One of the first walkout basements I was in, where I was gonna be putting actually a wood floor down, not this one that I'm gonna talk about, was a fire and water job. It was a water job, sorry, where she had had water damage. But what I'd noticed is the water damage, unlike when you see immediate catastrophic water damage, it looked like some of this had molded and rotted forever. You had really bad cupping in all the hardwood, and the little State Farm agent came out and said, oh, it can't be that bad because he did a little moisture test over here. And I said, well, we didn't even have any cupping hardwood over here. Like, I don't think there was really any damage or problems over here. You should check other parts of the room and see where the moisture is. And he was like, oh, it's already good. I signed off on it. Are you going to lay the wood floor or not? And I said, no, because you still have wet drywall over here and moisture in the floor. And he's like, I think you're good. Just do it. Well, fuck you, because when it fails, they're not gonna say State Farm said it's okay. They're gonna say Levi sucks and we want money or him to come and redo this job. And I started noticing, how does a moisture test work on your average? I'm not talking about a calcium or anything. How does your typical moisture meter work? It checks for continuity, right? Between 2 points. You touch a slab with two prongs. And however much continuity is between those two prongs is however much moisture is in the slab, right? So it gives you a reading. Does that make sense? So what happens if you don't have any, like right here, it's not connecting and not conducting electricity at all. It doesn't mean anything about, I fucking mess up everything. Leah, huh, woo, shit. Now you go away. Fuck that. Oh, I'm good. I'm super smart. I fixed it without any help. Sorry. I am good. I'm super smart. Apparently. This board thinks I'm Jesus or something.
It might be that button that you were just pointing at. What's that?
Wow. We'll just. Fuck. Apparently it's censored. Stop. Stop talking dirty, Levi. I'm going to tell my mom. So. That one. I was on that slide. Stop talking. Smart board.
Is your slurry mix, is it just B and
It's fucking listening to every damn word I say. Now go back. Say again?
Is the slurry mix, it's gypsum, but is it part B? If you use gypsum, or is it part B?
You have to always mix your components of epoxy first. You mix a proper epoxy mix, then you add your gypsum. Never mix your gypsum without a proper mix of epoxy first. And how I showed you guys how to get a harder epoxy by letting it like exotherm in the container, fuck that. That's great for a hard clear coat on top of a countertop. This, right now, you should be learning, you want as much working time as possible on a floor. You're not trying to let stuff get hot in a bucket and then hope you have time to spread it. So, okay, so your walkout basement. So just because moisture isn't here doesn't mean shit about your moisture over here. So you start looking around and trying to figure this stuff out. And what I started quickly realizing when I did a lot of water damage jobs was I started noticing that usually what was happening on the outside of the house had a whole lot more to do with the success of the job than what was happening inside. So I started walking around and I realized, oh, this lady actually planted a bunch of plants, and she was probably like me, where she just was like, the more water, the better. So she put a dripper here. All that water's flowing down, getting underneath the slab. She created her own water damage, right? Does that make sense? I've also seen where you have hills where there's no French drain or anything like that to redirect the water somewhere else. So it's pushing a whole bunch of water every time it rains right under here. I've also seen where there's not a correct downspout trying to get water out and away from a property. Does that make sense? So you'd never believe how much water a roof can collect. So because of the fucking communists in this state, it was illegal to collect your own rainwater for years here. So you couldn't, if you tried to collect rainwater off your own roof, it wasn't your water. California owned it. Hate California. Fucking communists. So, yeah, that's why they should burn in hell. So, no, I'm kidding. That was a joke. So maybe. Yeah, you couldn't have a pond on your property. You couldn't accidentally put a ditch in to get water away from your house. Anything you did that might have disrupted the water from going to California, you'd get sued by the government. So I started on all my jobs looking on the outside of houses, and I could not believe how often I started realizing, I know technically it's not my job. I'm not a gutter repair guy, but I also don't want to be the bad warranty guy. And who here knows a contractor that says, oh, I don't move couches. I'm not a fucking furniture mover. Y'all know somebody like that? Those guys are pieces of shit, and they're always going to be struggling. And you watch the next guy you hear talk like that in a job that says it's not my problem, that's not what I do. Just watch how successful he is. Look at his whole fucking pathetic life. Look at his company. Look at the lawsuits he's probably gotten. Look at the frustrated negative reviews he has if he has any real company, which he probably doesn't. You always just see losers that think somebody else's problem isn't their own problem. And I totally disagree. I think when you're called out to fix a floor, you're the expert, and you should take on as many of those customers' problems as possible, because I think it's your duty as a human, as a Christian, as a whatever the fuck you want to pretend to be, to try to take care of that customer. Because at the end of the day, if I'm a judge, I'm still going to be like, you did know the gutter wasn't redirecting water, and you didn't make the customer fix it. You're an idiot. I'm going to at least hold you partially responsible. I don't feel bad for people like that. So I think it is your responsibility to say, ma'am, I know you don't really care about the hill that's draining moisture down, but if you don't pay me or somebody to put a French drain in, I'm not doing your basement. Well, I have another guy that'll let me, then let him do it. I don't care to make your money off you. I care too much about doing the job properly. And I think when you start doing that to customers, a lot of those people that you're like, well, I don't want her to spend her French drain money on a French drain and not on me. Do you know how many of those people will have you back for any job? They'll refer you to anything. They'll love you and they'll trust you because they knew you didn't care about profit. You cared about taking care of their home. And most people, be honest, the biggest single investment of most people's life is their home that they live in. There's probably not a lot of people that own a ton of items worth more than their property. So you should show up and try to take care of it as much as possible. So I started trying to tell people to redirect irrigation that I saw, either move shrubs, maybe water them less, figure out a French drain, maybe some kind of plastic underneath the soil to redirect stuff away from the house. But let's say you're in a situation, water's already there, we need to deal with it no matter what, because we are gonna coat this. Maybe there's still moisture in this because a line broke under a sink, and we know it's not because of an external thing, it's happening inside the house.
So what's the minimum moisture you pour then? Because you can't get rid of all of it.
About 8%, but we'll just go over. This is what I would do. So you're in a slab, it had a lot of moisture. What does acetone do with water? Yeah, acetone will mix with water. What does alcohol do when it comes next to water? Alcohol, actually, the purer the alcohol, it'll draw water to itself. It'll actually pull water right out of a slab. So what I would do in a property like this, and I've done this many times, I will saturate this slab with a ton of alcohol. Wear a mask, turn off pilot lights. Has anyone seen that new water heaters? A lot of new water heaters, and I found this out at my dad's house, God rest his soul. He's still alive. A lot of new water heaters have a detector on it, and the detector is for flammable liquids, right? Now, if it detects flammable liquids, it will shut the pilot light off. Do you know how you get the pilot light back on? Replace your water heater. I'm not joking. Fucking communists. I'm telling you. Yes. Shuts it off. The most common way to replace that, and one of the easiest, if you don't go like my dad, he's super picky and called every company, found out who made the part, and replaced the part, you can actually end up replacing your water heater. Does that make sense? Now, it's extremely uncommon, and it has to be a serious amount of alcohol down before you can trip that sensor. What I would do is shut the pilot light off and then plastic off around your water heater. Make sure that you actually have closed it off so it doesn't get any air circulation or ventilation with solvents into where the pilot light is and the flame on your water heater. Does that make sense? Yeah. So be thoughtful of that. I would saturate this floor with alcohol. What that does is it pulls the moisture towards the surface. If you have an extensive amount in there, put fans in here first for a day or two, 5 days, a week, whatever it is to get the moisture out of there. Then right before you skim coat, saturate with alcohol. It pulls the moisture to the surface. Mix your skim coat and then mix 7% acetone. I do not put this always in the manual because I don't want people fucking this up, but it's a trick that I'll teach in advanced class because it does work very well. Acetone will mix with water. So you dry the slab out, draw it to the top with alcohol, and don't use 70% alcohol. Why? Still has 30% water in it, right? Yeah, there's a brain builder right there. Use 99% alcohol. You don't want to be putting more moisture right back into the slab. Draw that out with alcohol, mix 7% acetone, which that's a ton of acetone to go into your epoxy. Then squeegee coat this and work that into the slab as much as possible. Again, back to when you're skim coating a slab, most people say, hey, I squeegeed it, it's fine. I've seen many times where you can squeegee coat a slab and 70% of the slab you could walk on 5 minutes later in your socks and not get your socks even wet with any epoxy because so much is saturated in, the slab is completely dry. That is a slab where you should have had a little more product down and you should continue rolling it or cross squeegeeing it back into there because your goal is not just to say, oh, I technically sealed it. It's to work as much of that epoxy down into that surface as possible. Sometimes I'll work back and forth across. If I was sealing this up right here, I'd probably mix 7% acetone with my epoxy if I thought there was moisture, and I bet that I'd 8 or 10 times I'd cross squeegee it back and forth, and then I'd cross roll it, making sure every single square foot of that slab was hit, 8, 10 times. It would take all of an hour to fully seal this slab up right here. The other thing being that if you do have a slab and you just pull a squeegee across it once and say it's sealed, the bad thing is you may have just pulled a tiny bit of epoxy of epoxy across that slab, and most of that slab, the epoxy soaked in 1/8 of an inch, 32nd of an inch, and now it's dried. It's blocking any of your future attempts to seal that slab. It's blocking all that epoxy off to the surface. So if you really work in your first coat, you're getting a really deep penetrating bond, which makes your slab itself a lot more durable and shock resistant. The epoxy itself cures out to about 15,000 PSI, no matter what, if it's mixed correctly. Your concrete, even the best concrete on earth, if it's not done at the correct altitude, temperature, humidity, and in a really, even pressure and stuff like that matters. Even the strong stuff, you're not getting more than 5,000 PSI out of it. So, yes, sir.
What if it's the concrete's already been sealed, or do you need to use an etcher on it? Like if it's
If it is sealed well and the sealer's bonded, you don't really need to undo that. Yeah, if I would worry more if it was, say, like a cheap urethane that's flaking off, then I would go in and surface grind it really quick to get that back off the surface. And the reason I'm glad he said that. He used an etcher. He said using etcher. So who's etched with muriatic acid? What's a downside to muriatic acid etching? You can neutralize it with vinegar. A ton of water. You just put tons of moisture into your slab. Yeah, it's much better to never etch. So I never acid etch anything. So deal with your drainage. Alcohol to draw moisture. Acetone mixed in. Now, if you had oil in your slab, acetone and xylene chemically do almost the exact same thing to epoxy. The difference is if it's on moisture, what does xylene mix with easily? Xylene is a oil base, right? What's oil do on water? Floats on top of it, right? So if you mixed xylene in, a lot of people cut their shit with xylene, it would actually make sure you couldn't penetrate a moist slab. Does that make sense? The epoxy itself will still do a decent job sealing. Acetone just helps it cut in and seal to the water. Xylene would actually hold it out of that slab because xylene is an oil base that would not penetrate a moist slab. So, but what it will do is it'll cut oil. So if you're in a slab, the city of New York, we had some of our guys go out there for the brand new city building that the city of New York bought that we were going to do epoxy on. They showed up and there was just caked grease and dirt because the idiot in charge of that said, he laughed, he thought it was funny, and he said, well, it was a new building to us. And so my guys went in there and washed the slab with xylene. I was like, well, fuck New York. So they went and dumped 5-gallon buckets of xylene down, put masks on, squeegeed it all around the place. I don't think any of it went down the floor drains in the state of New York. Floor bonded awesome. I actually got a letter of appreciation over that shit. So, yeah. Don't use floor levelers. A bunch of moisture goes into your slab. If you're dealing with moisture, get the moisture dealt with. Figure out why the moisture came, how to mitigate it in the future, what's happening outside of the building. And I cannot believe how many properties I've been on where I've been like, wow, I walked around the outside of this house and I can see where the water damage would come from. It's a low-laying house, the lowest part of the property, no drainage anywhere. You start dealing with other issues. And guess what? Your warranties, you almost never have them if you deal with these things properly. Does anybody have any questions on that? How's our room coming along? Are we ready? What are we waiting on? Just us? Perfect, okay. So what we're gonna do is redo our lounge, and I'm kinda sad because as much as I don't like that fucking lounge, I think that floor is hideous. For some reason, customers all think the floor is pretty. So we're gonna go in here, pull the cabinets out, the countertops out, the plants out. Dom didn't wanna do that without you guys. So we'll get everything out of there. We're gonna mask off across the entryway, and then I'll get people to help mix, and we'll pour that floor.
So we don't, we pour on top of it, we don't have to prep it.
All I would do is clean it from oil, wax, sand, and maybe sand it real quick.
I know you're busy, you have 50,000 people.
No, you're fine. What's up? I would sand it real quick.
But like when we get on, so when you say, because we do all flooring, we polish concrete, we do all that shit, but should we prep? Because I was seeing where they.
I wouldn't grind it.
Don't grind it.
No,
down
if
to
it's
aggregate.
already epoxy, don't grind it unless the epoxy's falling off.
Yeah, because a lot of times we'll do, and I know that guy does Austin, but we'll do, our contractors are in Austin, and
Right.
we'll do like the high rises for UT and shit like that.
Well, and don't grind, just sand if it's like loose, flaky
When
stuff,
you
sand
say
it.
Sand, do you mean like the screen sand?
Yeah, exactly. I use a
Side to
120 grit
side?
screen, 80 or 120 all the time.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
On the concrete, not a, So we don't have to cut into the aggregate and expose it or any of that.
Only
shit.
time I'm ever doing that is if there was a high spot I had to cut off flat.
But other than that, we just play on the slur on top, just
Uh-huh.
scratch it up, and give it something to grab onto with
Uh huh.
those little
And
scratches.
usually you're making sure that they didn't put some nasty wax that hardened that you don't really see that you're not cleaning off. The sander just kills it right away. I mean, you should, and it just cuts your prep time way down. Yes, sir. Uh huh.
Did you want to do that little office in there or no? Because it's the
No.
same floor. Okay, so
Just because that, yeah, it's probably a lot of shit in there.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We'll leave that all in there. We'll just mask off across that door. Let's make sure we mask into the transition correctly, though. Yeah, foil tape, masking tape, tape and drip. Is it here?
Yeah, no, it's just right there on the cart.
Let's go get it. You need a drink. Hold it right there.
Do you want come start taking orders?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Does anybody want to place orders right now?
Do we place them tomorrow?
Yeah, don't worry about it. Yeah, we'll do it tomorrow. Yeah, it's fine. I don't think this is a purchasing class. Good thing I'm not a salesman. Yeah, yeah.
And you can't do that afterward with your.
No.
No, I definitely want to utilize that 25% discount.
Okay, we'll make sure somebody comes out.
Thought it through yet.
We'll make sure somebody comes out. We'll bring the leaf blower. We'll just leave this all outside. Awesome. Dom's got it.
I have no idea what colors these are, like sandstone, copper, charcoal.
We don't care. We won't do the same. I was doing that on purpose. I was just messing with you. You were standing on a chunk that I couldn't make move, so I started just blowing you. Not blowing you, but you know.
Oh, I was like, are you okay?
Obviously not. Yeah, we'll keep. And the only reason I actually clean out here is because people will track what's here into there. So, all right. What colors are we thinking?
Do you want to do completely different, or are we just trying to mimic this?
Oh, you fucking pick, dude. What do you think? Do the same. Do we have the same colors?
Yeah.
Let's do the same colors right on top.
I'm guessing it's just sandstone, copper, charcoal. I don't know what that blue shit is, and pearl. I think that's.
What blue shit? Is there some trans in there, you think?
But it's unless they just poured it right over the. Black
I actually almost kind of think if that's just the look we're getting through charcoal on top. I don't know that that's really like.
Like kind of like pearl swiped through the charcoal.
Yeah, I don't know that it's really a blue. So Yeah, do whatever colors you guys think. We could even kind of change. I mean, I don't mind copper, black, white, and brown. Obviously, browns are brown right there.
Do you think it's aged bronze or is it brown?
I think it was sandstone. But I think aged bronze would still look really cool.
Let's really tape off that transition right there under the door. So, yeah, we need a really straight transition here. We'll clean one more time. So anybody that wants to help prep in here, tape. We're gonna tape a transition right here along here, right at the entryway. We're also gonna tape a transition with foil tape in here, so that we don't have to pour that other room because we have a lot of storage in there. So that's about it. No, we will not. So. No, I would, at the best case, if I thought they had an eggshell paint or something that's not cleanable, is I would take a tape and drape and tape it up on their base. If you actually put tape in the base, if you don't pull it before your epoxy's cured, you'll have tape stuck in all the baseboards. So I'll just be careful with my T-bar not to splash it up on it too much.
Really? And then just use a rag and just
If you splash some, yeah. Yeah, but we're going to be mixing our colors all into our epoxy, and then we're just spraying a clear alcohol. So if you don't splash it, it should be zero mess up on your base or anything.
I'll show you.
And we'll usually, now, we'll do this with foil on top too. So, do that, that's fine. Because we'll pull it, yeah, you're fine. Yeah, do this out that side a little and then double stack it. Now the reason why I wouldn't, the reason why I probably wouldn't tape, the reason I wouldn't tape like this, guys, and this is just me, is we have so many layers building up on the floor here. You're gonna see a little bit of this floor, a little bit of that floor, a bit of that floor. I would tape right out across that, create a whole new transition.
Yeah, because either that or I would cut that or something.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. sorry, people. I know you guys are complaining. Complainers. I wasn't saying anything important, anyways.
Why full tape on this one?
Just because we're not looking to pull it tonight, we just want that to be a permanent transition that we can.
The only time you use it when it's permanent?
Yeah, I mean, you could use either, but that's super durable. I might not pull it today. I want something strong that if I get under it with a 5-in-1 and have to fold it over and break it tomorrow. So, I'm gonna run upstairs real quick. Oh. Who wants to help mix? Okay. You'll get to see everything. Who's gonna mix? Okay, cool. So we'll set them off in here. We'll be super organized. We're gonna make a line as close to our door as possible because we don't want to have our buckets sitting all over the room. We'll pop the caps off. Let's pop the caps off of at least 5 of these buckets.
What size you need, I'll run get 'em.
Medium, please.
Here, I'll slide them out and show everybody the bucket. So here, I'll kind of show you guys if you guys are interested, I'll kind of show you the bucket setup here. So around the bucket is a strip we need to pull so we can get the lid off. Does that make sense? You got to be careful. There's a lot of debris on these lids. So if you're not cleaning your lids before you bring them on your job site, be thoughtful that when you pop your lid off, you're just dumping a bunch of debris on your floor. So be kind of careful how you pull this lid off. Inside your bucket is your can of hardener, right? Sitting in what's called a cradle. Here's your cradle. There's resin in there. So I'm just hold on one second. Thank you. I'm just going to set that cradle right here inside of a bucket lid right there, right? Then I'm going to take a 5-in-1, a screwdriver, or whatever I need to, pop my actual metal retention clips off. Now, I am not going to put my hardener into my resin until I know I'm ready to actually pour the product, right? Because as soon as I do that, it's going to start the chemical reaction, right? So now I'm going to take all my resin buckets, I'm going to line them up next to each other with my bucket handle facing me. Figure out what colors I'm going to mix. And I'm going to dump corresponding colors into each bucket, whatever colors I want. I'm going to mix my color first, and then I'm going to pour the entire contents of my hardener in there. So you guys can start doing that. Dominic? Where's Dom?
Are these going to be used for anything?
I want you to be in charge of this section and really watch.
Are these going to be used for anything?
Nope, we just set them. I just stack all these cradles on top of each other. So I just stack them all up and make one stack of cradles.
And if you aren't mixing, just go ahead and step out.
Unless you're filming.
No, mixer's got to get out.
Yeah, not to be an asshole, we probably only need 2 people, 3 people in here mixing. You can take turns, tag each other.
I think that one's been sealed.
Yeah, I'm going to try. You looking for something? Huh? Noise the fuck out of me. Nope, nope. So
What tools do you have?
if just, I'll just explain, if everybody listens, I'll just explain exactly what we're gonna do. So if the questions aren't answered by watching me at this point, don't worry about it. I'm not gonna try to do a job and answer questions. So right here, as soon as this first one goes in here, we're gonna mix for 1 minute with a drill. As soon as 1 minute's up, this can of hardener goes into the next bucket. That 1 minute of mix here that's done, this drill goes to this bucket. During that minute, your second person is stick mixing, scraping the sides and bottom of this first bucket. At the end of the first minute in here, first bucket, you stick mix it the second bucket for 1 minute. Well, this gets its second full minute of drill mixing. Does that make sense? So each bucket is going to have a drill mix for 1 minute, a stick mix for 1 minute, a drill mix for a minute, right? Then it goes poured on the floor. The things to watch for with your stick is to scrape any chunks of powder. That's the biggest thing you're going to see. Chunks of powder breaking off, and it sucks when you pour your bucket out on the floor and you see some chunks. You're trying to fight with them with the T-bar and everything. If you already have a decorative pattern going down, you really fuck it up trying to break up clumps of powder. So be very thoughtful. So you want 1 minute drill, 1 minute stick, 1 minute drill. You can leapfrog your buckets back and forth to get that time frame done, if that makes sense. But you have to be very organized. So we're going to work in a single direction here and get done. So if you wanted to pour your charcoal, if we were on a huge job, say this bigger, and we weren't going to T-bar the whole floor all at once. We were going to be slowly working across, and we were just worrying about a ratio of product. So say we wanted 2 coppers, 2 charcoals, a white, and a sandstone, and that was kind of our mix ratio, but we were doing 10,000 square feet. Like I did a 10,000 square foot floor where I think we mixed 370 mixes. So what we would do is we'd mix a charcoal, a white, a sandstone, 2 coppers, and then we'd start with that same process. And we just repeated that mix over and over and over. It's not like you're going to mix all your charcoal, dump them out on the floor, and then mix all your copper and dump it on the floor, because by the time you got to your copper, your charcoal's already cured, if that makes any sense, or cured too much to work with. So we're wanting to be really thoughtful that we're working in the ratios. This is a small room, so we can just mix all our product at once or in order. So what is our number one factor? How long, if we don't have any time between buckets, how long is it going to be from this bucket to our final bucket?
30 minutes.
It's going to be 6 times 3 approximately, right? Your biggest factor that takes you time, and it'll actually be slightly less than that because you're leapfrogging whatever, right? But think about this, your number one limiting factor on a big job is mixing people. If you wanted to cut your mixing time in half, add 1 drill. You want to cut it to a quarter, add 3 drills, if that makes sense. Have 4 instead of 1. So your mixing time is usually astronomically slower than whoever's T-barring it or dumping it on the floor. So this is your slowest time. This also should be your smartest employee right here. This should be the only guy that you trust to be talking to you, and he'll be telling you when you're going through the job. Dom will be like, hey, Levi, you're actually way ahead on product. You could pull it a lot thicker, leave a lot more behind. You're trying to pull it too thin. Or, hey, dude, we're 7 buckets behind and we're halfway through the job site. You need to pull it a lot thinner because you're not getting the coverage you need. That person mixing needs to be helping you with your math. If we're working on a big job, we would know that in the first room we had 4 buckets total. In the second room we had 3 buckets. The 7th room we had 9 buckets. The main room we had 12. And he's watching and doing all that math, and he might have a notebook with him, and he's like, hey, you're right on schedule. Hey, telling the guy that's maybe dumping, hey, you dumped 1 too many buckets in that room. Tell him to try to pull it out the door. So you have to be pretty strategic with whoever's mixing and directing this happening. So right now, that can go in there, and we'll start. Who's going to drill mix? You're mixing? Who's our timer?
I can see the clock from here.
Okay, so you're in charge of watching this. Do we have a trash bag or something we could bring in here for him?
Yeah, there's a trash can right there.
Can you keep it like about that level?
You just get a good vortex going in the bucket and you'll be fine. And now when he's at about 20 seconds from his minute being up, and it doesn't really matter in here because we're not losing a ton of time, but if you're on a big job, I probably wouldn't want to dump the hardener in right away because you're starting that reaction a little prematurely. But maybe 20 seconds from this bucket being done, you'll tell him, he'll take that, dump it in there, throw the can out so she's ready to switch right in. Who's gonna be our stick mixer? No, this has a lot of air release. It's a very low viscosity, so a lot of the air will come right back out.
5 seconds out. Now.
Hey, Leah. Do I have a T-bar and spikes and all that? Okay. So this is a T-bar applicator. This is how I choose to pour most of my epoxy. If you look at this, it's almost like a roller, but it's like a half roller sleeve. So instead of this rolling, it slides. And if you notice, it's like the phenolic fiber. So it kind of gauges the thickness that your product's going to go down at, which is really nice. So you're not struggling. A lot of guys run squeegees and they accidentally pull way too much of their product. Then they try to put it back. You end up with squeegee chop marks everywhere. I don't use weighted T-bars. So a lot of guys do, and it's fine if you do. With our product, weight doesn't make as much of a difference. You could go faster or hold it. I've used them. I just don't think you need them. It's not like it kills your job. You just don't need them.
Do you ever have an issue with the fibers on that?
I usually just, no, not at all. Nuh-uh. I usually will kind of just try to get any fuzz off. I'm personally against taping because I think taping rollers just makes it shed worse. So.
Once you're done with this last minute, you go ahead and pour the other one. Start on the next.
Yeah, as soon as she's done with this. Now, if you're just working, I don't want too many people walking around in here, or else it will be a dirty floor with a lot of debris on it. So.
Customer's house, we would take off the base and all that.
I would not. Or else if you don't pull it in time, you have tape stuck in all your base. I would just be real careful pouring into it real nice and easy. I'll be real careful around the edges, so. Huh? Never. Only our countertop was at 90. We don't do that with our other products. And now if you do this, and it doesn't really matter, but if you are trying to keep it from contaminating,
Yeah. Okay.
and the other thing, you're probably blocking the vents on the drill.
Oh, that's why I'm getting hot.
It's going to get really hot. Drills are meant to cool themselves,
Okay.
so you want to make sure you're not blocking those vents. Was that your second mix or your first mix in there? Okay. No, no, you're fine. Thank you, by the way. You're doing really good.
20 seconds out. Oh wait, I gotta go back to the
I thought you were resting your elbow on her. I was like, what a pimp.
10 seconds.
That sandstone is so cool.
I dig it. It is pretty. Doesn't look like fucking sandstone.
Alright, is that good? Okay. That's gorgeous.
Am I good to pick that up?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Sorry. I will. I'll do it. I'll do it. Let me just leave it right here, and we'll set all the buckets right here, and then we'll just move one stack right to a plastic out there. Watch yourself. Sorry about that. Huh?
Remember that one guy that he was like stepping backwards and just like
And slipped and fell? Amazing. It was funny. When you have to decide whether would I rather smell it or taste it. Watch behind you, Victor. I dripped everywhere. I know, look one spot. This is gonna be a slippery floor to be on too, because this hard epoxy. Epoxy on epoxy. Let's put that out the door now. Watch behind you. Let's put one. We'll put one piece of plastic down just to set the buckets on. Done?
Oh no, one more.
Even with all that mixing, we still get a stream of unmixed color in there?
It's not unmixed, it's just thicker there. Metallics always settle like that when you're mixing them.
This is a good workout.
Yeah.
FYI. Like my
Being
back-
bent over for that long is like,
Yeah.
what's that, sir?
Any rhyme or reason on how you're just pouring these kind of
20.
dispersed evenly and like.
Yeah, I just want charcoal to be kind of evenly all the way to the door, white to be even, and since some of them we have more charcoal and more copper, I have to be a little thinner with the other two colors. So I just wouldn't want it all be a charcoal side, a copper side.
Bye.
Spread out it kind of evenly.
Uh-huh.
What do you look?
I don't mean to yell at you guys. Now.
What are we looking at?
Yeah, he's trying to figure out how much product you would need for like and how thick you're going on this top coat.
Oh, we'll figure all that out. We'll do all the math with you on that to get exact.
Yeah,
So,
that'd be helpful.
yeah. Yeah?
Because I'm all messed up and ready to go. I'm about to pour a countertop. I didn't know if you had anybody after this that would want to watch or.
No, probably not in the class. I appreciate that,
I
though.
was like, hey,
Thank you so much. I definitely would.
Are you gonna be the one spreading it and everything? Are you gonna be the one spreading it and everything?
Yeah, probably. The only thing that sucks is if you let different people, it'll be totally different patterns everywhere, and we just have to redo it again. This done?
yes.
Is that how you're saying?
Yeah, and I'll just leave this one right here for you for a minute, because a lot more will drip out of that one.
It's pretty warm that one too.
We don't have to. What's that, sir? No, this is actually, it's that phenolic block material, so.
And on the edges, how you get off there?
We'll just spray alcohol, let it settle off.
Oh, okay. So it's not that big of a deal.
Not a huge deal. If this was a finished job where I'd painted the base already or somebody had, I'd be really careful and slow. I'd maybe even have somebody run in with spikes and cut in with a paintbrush.
Because a lot of the ones that we do, they already have the painters already done with it.
I can usually, like this one I'll do. See how I just let it kind of settle into that?
Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
That's cleaner than anybody could cut in.
Yeah, that's not okay. Very nice.
Then you end up with a real razor sharp edge on that. Turns into a really cool transition. We'll go over some of that. Let's talk about the tactical stuff in a minute. But I'm not going to answer questions while I'm out here. Sorry. wouldn't want you to ask somebody that hasn't done it either. So. And just so y'all know, this is all metallics in here. If you did liquid bases, like the opaque liquid pigments, they block color like crazy. This is very translucent, what we did in here. If you wanted it to look real thick, you could put this down over a black base or something. It'd leave a thicker, more 3D look. What's that? I mean, guys do that a lot. You just end up with. That's how losers do stuff. Or me. Wait a minute. Or me. I've tried a lot of shit like that. I just wanted to talk shit and then admit that I've done it.
That's funny.
Well, once you learn there's a better way. Watching that video off YouTube, you figure out the better way, so you realize,
I don't actually know what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to listen to this YouTube video in my headset here. You think this looks like dysentery in here? It's like the Oregon Trail, huh?
yeah, I noticed that too. See, someone argued Mona Lisa looked like a guy with a hood. It's all in the eyes of the beholder. I think it's pretty nice. But I'm talking about the more lush colors, like things that's more like this. Just add a French ending to it or something. It is so. About half the room.
And it is possible too much product.
Probably not easily, because it'll just flow and self-level better.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
So Levi, when you have a little bit too much, just keep spreading.
yeah, just make sure that whatever technique or pattern, however you're running the T-bar, is somewhat similar. That you're not covering up the colors you don't want to cover.
We got a chrome pole we can put right in the middle of the floor.
For me to dance on? I don't think anybody want to see me dance.
Come on, man.
Dance for all the blind girls. If you're paying to watch me strip, you're fucked up.
That's called gallons of jungle juice.
Although, let's be honest, I would play on a stripper pole if nobody was watching, just to see if I could.
Well, we know what you're getting. We know what you did for Christmas.
So you guys are going to send me a stripper pole?
We're going to address it to your wife for you for Christmas.
Thank you.
Has anybody tried to airless spray this or put in some kind of sprayer?
No, not that I've seen. Not. Now pull that plastic out. Don't make sure you don't pull it off the floor.
That's why I don't like paint drying this shit. Yeah, this shit's a pain in the butt. We'd rather layer tape it to the plastic.
What? Yeah, just not 99%. It's a lot easier to get that all over with the backpack spare.
We put a lot of product down in here. Yeah. If some's good, a lot's better, right?
So it don't matter how much you pour it.
Depends on what we're talking about when we say that. I've seen some things I didn't need more of.
It'll all level out.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want some pearl accent?
Nope.
No?
We're not going for what we had. We're just going for something good, Dom.
No, I know. I'm just saying letting it a little bit more white.
Who says that?
I do. I just need some.
God damn. You and your white supremacist shit, Dom, always needing more white.
You could, but it's free.
I would grab like a twig or a fucking branch and dip that and drag it all around. Something like that. Nice.
I'll just leave that right there. It's fine if it's underneath. Nope, it's okay if it's underneath. Thank you. You don't want to walk everywhere when you're doing this, guys, because you're going to leave some spike marks if you're not careful where you step. So go as close as you need to go to spray, and the rest, just spray where you can reach.
Okay. So you don't want to be walking everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Not directly. Not directly onto the board.
You can be direct. It won't hurt anything. But you do want to be very thoughtful that you're hitting every square inch of the entire floor.
Exactly why you don't want to torch on the floor.
Yeah, we wouldn't want a torch in here now. I wouldn't want one in here. It's hard for you all to see where you're at right now, but I'll do over here. It lays down really nice with the alcohol on it. It really levels out more, and it marbles it really nice. If you were on a big project, you'd want a mask right now if you were out here.
Do you want one? Do you want one, Diva?
Huh?
Would you like a mask?
No, I'm good.
Right? And it pops the bubbles, or that's just the torch? Does that help with the bubbles too?
Oh yeah, this pops all the air bubbles, self-levels the product. Overnight it'll be like kind of hard to the touch. It probably won't be walkable until tomorrow afternoon. Especially this room is we cannot get this has way too much air in and not enough returns. So there's a ton of cold air pumping into this room. So I'll probably let it set for 3-4 days before I really use it much. Put anything back out. So usually if you could get the temp up in here, you could use it tomorrow afternoon. Carefully. Now this is a slow curing epoxy. That's also partly why it's so hard. A slow curing epoxy is harder than a fast curing epoxy. So this here, I mean, the floor out there, I've done burnouts in my truck on it, so. I've done a lot of things you wouldn't want to do either, but I've done a lot of things you shouldn't do or shouldn't want to do either, so. I'm not like a role model just because I've done that, but if it makes my kids laugh, I really don't care.
That's it.
If my little girls laugh, I'd probably do almost anything.
That's right, you ain't lying. And these will go away. Is it spike marks?
Yeah, most of them will. Sometimes, like that white, I'm not super worried about it, but if I couldn't fix it, I'd probably come in with a chip brush and just kind of wipe it out and stempel it in.
Okay.
And it's not bad if you're doing this to carry a chip brush so you can bend down and run some of that. We got the cardboard dome. Oh, yes, we do.
We do.
Look how fast.
2 layers.
You can't get much past Dominic. He's learning a lot. This job was totally prepped and helped organized by him. Good job, Dom. You're not Leah level yet, but you are getting there.
When you were spraying this, did you hit the baseboards? You're not gonna worry about that till later on.
Huh?
When you were doing this, did you hit the baseboards for the extra access, or you're not gonna worry about that?
I did spray it. A lot of that's just dirty shit now too. So I think that if we really cared about it, I'd come in with a rag and wipe it as I went, or I would have been pushing it more carefully. These are totally non-painted, so because we're finishing a whole remodel from here to the front of the building. So hopefully in January, when there's not a whole lot of you guys, but we have a lot of time, when we're sitting around bored because we just haven't had enough work this year, we'll start doing that stuff. Yeah.
Ah.
You guys might not like that, but you'll see big, really cool marbled areas tomorrow.
I like that. It's a great idea.
If you get it in your eye, it's also good because then you can't see it. Everything looks great.
Would you like your sleeve?
Yes. All right, that's it, guys. It's alcohol. So for the rest of the day, guys, place orders if you want to with Sarah. Make whatever samples you want to make because you have till 4 o'clock. Tomorrow we're going to go over more of the flooring and we're going to go over marketing. So, but remember, tomorrow we're not doing anything in this classroom. So if you want to make something, make it. But I will be kind of a prick. Don't be mixing at 3:55 and expect me to leave you in the room. We won't. So you have plenty of time right now. And we'll help you if you're helpable. Hi. Hope you guys like that. We're going to finish some stuff in the classroom, so if you guys want to watch, you can. If not, go do whatever you want to do. So the floor looks pretty badass. So somebody was shitting their pants in that fucking room when we were mixing, and I thought I was going to die.
Dude, that was yesterday.
I thought I was going to die.
Wait, someone was shitting their pants.
I thought it was
in
you
here?
crop dusting me, honestly.
I actually cleaned my hands with alcohol just so I could
Really?
breathe.
Just so you could. That's good. Should we pour the first pour on the casting so we can finish it tomorrow?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, let's get that casting. Bring out a bunch.
All
Just like 5, 6 hits.
What is what would you recommend to charge for square foot?
Let's go over that tomorrow because it's really,
No, that's fine.
it's so subjective as to what we charge and how and what. I mean, honestly, if you get brought in and the customer's like, hey, we already had a guy bid Rust-Oleum, I'll be like, nice to talk to you. Have a nice day.
Done.
I'm not
And
here.
we do that now.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's like, no offense, we're in the business to make money.
Exactly.
Because
And
we're the
and
kind
also
of guys-
Rust-Oleum's not gonna refer jobs to you. It's like, it's such a shit product. You're not gonna be getting referrals off that. You're gonna be having people call you to warranty all that.
And the thing is, we work till we make it right, and that makes it, we can't just.
Exactly. Hey, do you have any spots today?
No, I don't. I tried both kinds too, and no luck. So.
They're in. You're good.
Mhm.
So it's definitely that.
Yeah. As soon as I put that one on, I could feel it instantly. The other ones, not even a phase, not even a little dot. So. Mhm.
And then I had like all day.
Mhm.
Zero.
None. So I had it right there. There's nothing. Then I stand it over here and nothing.
That's nuts. Okay, well, thank you. And I felt terrible even asking. I was like, I need to go talk to Ben.
Take the lines. There to go. Dad sliced his hands open, I guess.
Your dad did?
Yeah.
What happened?
It said
You also want to mix nice and slow so that you're not putting a whole bunch of extra air in it. Thanks. Sorry.
I'm sorry if you already explained this, but we just walked up. What's the difference between the smaller containers and the bigger ones?
That's a hardener because it's a 2-to-1. So you got 1 gallon of A, half gallon of B.
Are you doing that in all tables?
What?
Are you doing that in all tables mainly? Like
That's
that?
casting. That's a casting resin, not a countertop resin. Countertop epoxy is 1-to-1. Casting resin's 2-to-1. Wall is 2-to-1. Flooring's 2-to-1.
So like if you wanted to do any kind of table like this, you'd use casting.
Casting, yeah. If you're wanting to pour a thick, clear product, you need casting. Casting resin.
Okay, that's what I was asking because we're doing it right now. I want to make sure.
Yeah, it'll be under casting.
Okay.
No, we're probably only going to pour about 4 or 4.5 gallons, see what we get, and then I don't want it to take off and get too hot.
Is that why you do those layers?
Yep, yeah. I mean, if you didn't care about that, you could just pour 2 feet of it, but it'd just get super hot and cook and crack and, yeah.
So if you want to do something like a wave blank and you want the color all the way through it, you kind of have to pour it all at once. Is that the kind of time where you would try to just cool the bucket so it didn't crack?
Yeah, you could. You throw it in a freezer or something like that after you mix it. Probably mix your product at 65. So that's also quite an art form that I'm not going to teach because there's so many variables that people that are good at casting, deep casting, they have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, and they're going to do it on their own and figure out their own techniques. I'm afraid to ever speak for it because even if I told you to control temperature and you don't feel like I adequately told you, you're going to want me to replace some $60,000 project of yours, and I'll just laugh. But you have all these people, like you explain, like that it's difficult but doable, and not a single person in here is going to pour that much product. So. And if you notice, he's going to really try to control when he's mixing to try to keep the paddle under the surface so that he's not whipping a whole bunch of air into it. And whether you like it or not with casting, everybody's like, well, it's just happening. Air's getting in it. You've got to fucking slow down or get a stick or change what you're doing. If you put a whole bunch of air in there, you may as well just throw it all away. So.
You say you're developing another product that's slower?
Just a little slower of a cast that you can pour thicker at the same time.
Coming out this fall?
Yeah, it'll actually be within about a month and a half, 2 months, I'm guessing, if everything works well. If you notice right here, that's still gummy. Where it's nice and thin on top of the wood, right down here where it was a little thicker, it's getting almost hard. Because thicker generated heated, cured faster, thinner, didn't.
That's why it cracks.
Uh-huh. What's the opposite of yellow in the color spectrum? Violet. Yeah, violet or violet, blue, purple. So if you're wanting to counteract known long-term yellowing, you can put a tiny bit of purple or blue, I mean a very tiny amount, into this. All the glass at like SeaWorld, it's all purple. And they're figuring if this is a 30-year lifespan, we know how quick it yellows. You have 4 feet of acrylic. How fast does it yellow? So they know that it's going to start out purple, be clear in the middle of its life, and turn yellow towards the end. So, yeah. Now, Dom, clean your hands before you touch that drill. Somebody get him a rag, please. Some alcohol. Dom, not your pants, man. You don't need hard. The only thing in your pants that should be hard is your keys. Dom can't drive, so his keys won't be hard in his pocket.
So is there a reason you're staying at just one angle instead of slowly moving it around through there?
No, I think I would move it around, but I'm not Dom. And I wouldn't go overboard on it. I'd just slowly be like, I'd spend 2 minutes of just a nice big circle trying to circulate product. And also, you don't want to mix just at the surface or just at the bottom, because if you notice, you want to get that vortex going. And you want to just keep that vortex circulating. You might even mix for a few more minutes. So if you hit 3 minutes, but you still see really clear unmixed swirls, you need to keep mixing for another minute or two.
full rate. 4 days ago, he was at 85. Top gold. Come on, man.
Is that good? My mic's on. I need to know, like, who is it on there that actually cares what I have to say that needs to hear my voice?
We've been mixing for like 4 minutes.
Keep going, Dom. You have a lot in there still to mix. All that stringiness needs churned in. That's good what you're getting right there. That you're turning a lot of A and B. Don't come up to the surface anymore or you're gonna put air in it. Putting a lot of air in it, Dom. Should go deeper. I know it's crazy usually when you go deep is when you put air in it, but see that smile? This is Dominic McNiggins. He's single.
I'm not, if you're watching.
You're not single?
He's like making
Oh, he's
sure.
not single. Never mind. I was trying to get him on us.
I was like, uh-oh.
No, never mind. I forgot. I forgot. Sorry, Lacey. I forgot. He's gonna pay.
It's okay, she never watches these anyways.
Said she doesn't see it anyways. Trust me, Dom. There's lots of girls out there watching for little guys like you that are sweet and have that cute smile. It's actually one parked. I'll pay you overtime if you stay. Clean up the parking lot.
If what?
If you like clean stuff in the parking lot
Yeah.
overnight. Come on, keep mixing.
The guy that's working at our ceiling, drop ceiling too.
Oh, is he here?
Yeah. Do you want me to go?
Yeah, let me go. did the front, the Super Trucks class did that actually.
Oh yeah.
That's the sand coating.
I like that.
It is kind of cool, very durable. Hey Dom, what do you keep?
Grab a piece of dirt out of there.
It's right. It keeps going around my.
I'd just stop and let it float up in here.
What?
No, I'm just saying I'd just stop dipping my fingers in it. And
I dipped it once.
I saw it earlier too.
Oh, it's true.
There it is.
Not single Dom.
I feel like there's a whole lot of bubbles in it. Did I whip all that much air into it?
Well, I don't think Jesus landed and did it for you.
I didn't bring it up above.
Pretty sure if it's there, you did it.
No, I told him to blame a new girl. It's fine.
It's okay. We have to throw it all away.
We'll keep an eye on the top.
Do we have snow, Dom? Do we have snow glitter? The snow? Go grab some. Put a tiny bit in there.
Just a pent.
Yeah. Decent amount. Pour a little bit in there.
Is that the height?
Because we're not doing color right now. Doing something a little decorative. Like, put a little bit in there, let her mix it in. Yeah, that's fine. Now let her mix. Now try to mix that down into the surface. You might want to actually dip the paddle through it. It doesn't do a lot just hitting it with the shaft, if you know what I mean. So. There you are. There you are.
Oh, look how pretty that is.
How long has the second mix been going for?
We're good now.
Okay, you're good. Now, is that drill dirty?
Not because of me. Okay.
That's what I did. I had a lot of towel tools.
Yeah, but it's the casting.
Are you trying to, is that your first mix? Yes. Yeah, so mix that with green mix and then cut the second one to and then mix it and then halfway put your two on.
That's cool.
Just make sure all your ingredients
It's pretty pretty.
Hey, Dominic. I'd grab that first bucket and do another. I don't think there's anything. I think it might, but I'm super impatient too. So.
Could also just finish it tomorrow.
Damn 'em.
I think we
Okay, we'll do it tomorrow.
like we could do it first thing in the morning and then like
No, we're fine. We'll do it tomorrow. Annoying as fuck. Waiting. Hate waiting.
Is there any way to get the air out of the wood before you cast?
No, but sealing it like brush coating with epoxy, yeah. And you're not getting it out as much as just sealing it in, so it's not going to be a factor.
That's what I kind of figured.
But usually bonding it to the bottom like this, casting around it. Now, this afternoon, we're going to want to spray along this wood because air is going to come out of the wood and then it's going to travel up the side of that piece of wood. And all your air bubbles will be along the sides of all these wood chunks. So all these transitions will have air bubbles along them. So we'll be spraying alcohol, really saturating a lot along the sides of this wood to pop all those.
Okay.
So, and usually you end up getting it well enough to where it's saturated in to where you almost have no air bubbles whatsoever if you do it properly. So. So.
The blue ones look interesting. And it looks like it's not even like.
Is it still flowing out nicely?
Starting to dribble.
Yeah, it's dribbling.
Can't believe you guys are putting all those agates in there, man. If you're just giving them to me, I could have taken them home.
Right.
I got a rock bed in front of my house that doesn't look really great.
Could've went out and smoked weed, moved them around.
I got what? 30 gallons of agate sitting in my shed.
I've actually got to dig for agates when I was little.
Oh, I find them constantly. There's sand pits all up around us with Lake Superior agates. Are like, you find that many in a day, no problem.
Really? That's cool.
And that's without hardly looking.
How's it, man?
Yeah. There's beaches up along Lake Superior that you cannot take an agate off of. They watch them too, so don't think you're gonna be trying to be slick and get away with it.
Do you guys see in France, they say like kilos of the most pure freaking cocaine they've ever found are washing up on the beaches. They say it's so pure you'll OD if you try it. And there was like people rummaging through the rocks and stuff. And they said they just keep finding package after package of. Like I knew something would get dommed to France. I'm like, I knew something would get dommed to France. My kids keep asking, can we go back to Paris? I'm like, what? We want to go to France, Dad. Anything else we should throw in here? Huh?
I think it looks good.
You like it just how it is? I do too. Perfect, Dom. That's a perfect second mix bucket for tomorrow. We just won't scrape the sides tomorrow. Just set it right underneath the table and it's perfect. Perfectly okay. Now, do you guys see the air bubbles coming back up to the surface now? It's just because slowly they just keep coming out of the epoxy, all the ones we mixed in. So you want to just keep coming back every 10, 20 minutes and spraying another spray of alcohol and really focusing on spraying into all the contours of this wood. So the air that's coming out of the wood also, all those bubbles get popped. Otherwise you'll have like, I cast one that I did that and then I cast again and I had like kind of a row of bubbles and spots that had risen to the top of the pour and then I cast them in.
So you said every 10 to 20 minutes for how long? A couple hours?
Yeah. I'll probably spray this again at 5, 6 when I leave and call it a day.
So here's a good question. I used to work in the newspaper industry and they had these jogging tables that would slightly vibrate.
Yeah, it won't really help with the epoxy. The bubble doesn't move any faster just because it's getting shook. It's not like concrete. See, a lot of that stuff happens because it's trying to move like concrete. I used to do concrete countertops, and shaking it slides the aggregate so that the air can work to the top. Whereas in this, it's not changing viscosity or aggregate's not moving. It just needs to take its time to travel to the top.
Can't vibrate it up.
Yeah.
Can't vibrate it up. Okay, well, that shoots that idea down. It's a good idea, but
the other kind of cool thing about a little bit of glitter, whether you like it or not, you might not do this color, but if you didn't want it, but it does kind of force the 3D look, so you really see the three-dimensional aspect when you have some kind of aggregate in there. So you might even do just the pieces themselves will show, but a lot of times I've seen people cast clear for the sake of clear for whatever reason. You don't really see that it's a thick, impressive cast unless you see a rock or wood or something in it that shows off how thick it really was cast. So.
Well, I have a question on one of the panels with the texture. Is that done in the one over here? Is that done in layers? Like you?
That was wall epoxy, just like what we trialed in there, and then I just used a roller or the one with the wood grain on it. I used a wood grain tool and just slid it. So, and we're gonna probably try to do that tomorrow. The 2 wood grain techniques.
Oh, okay. Did that cure before you did? And did you do another layer on top of it, or once?
I did. I troweled it, did it while it was still soft, and then I poured a clear over the top.
Okay.
A lot of times I've seen people cast clear, the sake of clear for whatever reason, you don't really see that it's a thick, impressive